Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another fun-filled extravaganza of knowledge. That's the opening. I'm going to go with it. Anyway, so I was thinking about other phrases or words that we use in the church a lot that I really wanted to answer, and one that kept coming into my mind, and I don't know if you guys have heard this, is like when people are like, I just have to run my race, or I have to run the race set before me, or things of that nature, and it's like, what does that even mean? And I mean, I feel like we use that in our, like, some of our common vernacular. It's kind of people will be like, oh, just stay in your lane, or, things of that nature, just mind your business, run your own race, that kind of thing. I just have to run my race. I have to do what's right for me, that kind of stuff. But that's not what it means in the Bible. It's actually very different than what it means in the Bible. And so today we're going to look at two different passages and kind of take apart what those mean. What does it mean to run your race, and what does it mean to run it effectively in regards to Christianity and spirituality? So, if you have your Bibles, turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 9. We're going to be picking up at verse 24, and we're going to go through the end of the chapter. And then later on, we're going to look at Hebrews 12, and we're going to look at verses 1 and 2 and a couple other verses in that chapter. And then, when we're done with those, maybe, we definitely will, finish in 2 Timothy. But we'll get to that when we get to that. So, let's start with 1 Corinthians 9:24. Do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may obtain it, and everyone who competes for the prize is temperate in all things. Now they do it to obtain a perishable crown, but we for an imperishable crown. Therefore I run thus, not with uncertainty. Thus I fight, not as one who beats the air, but I discipline my body and bring it into subjection, lest I have preached to others, I myself should be qualified. Or, I myself should be disqualified. I am so sorry. Yeah. But I discipline my body and bring it into subjection, lest when I have preached to others, I myself should become disqualified. And so let's break that down a bit, okay? Do you not know that all who run in a race, all run, but one receives the prize? That's a very true statement. For anybody that's run track or cross country or anything of that nature that involves running, there are a lot of competitors, but very few winners. Cross country is a little weird because it's more of a team thing, and honestly, I ran cross country and I have no idea how the scoring went. I just know that I was the guy at the back, so I knew I wasn't winning, so at least there's that. But, it says to run in such a way that you may obtain it. Now, what does that mean? And so, I think it's obvious. You're supposed to run, but we want to make sure that we understand this correctly, right? You don't run the 100 meters the same way that you run the 5K, or even the 10K, if you're insane enough to run that on track. I knew a guy who was, and loved it, and I don't know how. I hate running on tracks for that long. But run in a way that you may obtain it. So it's not just blind sprint, we're going to kill ourselves to get all the way through this. It's sometimes you have to pick a pace. You have to set the pace. You have to maintain the pace. You want a pace that's comfortable but still pushes you, When I was running cross country, I can't anymore because I'm an old man. But when I was running cross country, I could average around a 7-minute pace. I could easily sit around there for 5 miles. Well, not easily. I could sit around there for about 5 miles, and that was okay. That's what I could do, and so that's what I did. But when it came to like just running regularly, I like to sit around a 9 or a 10-minute mile. And so when I race, I run faster and I run a slightly more uncomfortable pace to make sure that I'm moving as fast as I can. And so, in 25 it says, everyone who competes for the prize is temperate in all things. It takes a lot of discipline to train for events like these. I ran cross country. I swam competitively in high school. And so I trained a lot. When I was in high school, I trained about, I gotta do math real quick, 12 hours a week. Yeah, about 12 hours a week. A little more, actually. And that was a really big time commitment of mine, but it was something that was important to me. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't want to go to practice half the time, but I did it anyway, mainly because my dad already paid for it and I had to. But, it takes a lot of discipline. It takes a lot of perseverance to keep doing that and to keep training, and knowing that when you're training, you're getting better. I like how it says, now they do it to obtain a perishable crown, but we an imperishable crown. Now, Paul here is referring to the Olympics. Yeah, I know, it's weird, right, to think Paul had Olympics in his time, but you got to remember, Olympics was Grecian in origin. I mean, that's why it's called the Olympics, because it was run, around Mount Olympus. And it was done in a way, it was actually kind of a worship of the gods in a way of doing that. And so they would compete in a bunch of different events, but one of them was running. And so Paul is talking to an audience that has witnessed these Olympics, has seen these people run, have seen these people train, because the training grounds were actually a public area. People would go and watch these athletes train. We don't really have that nowadays, but this is what was happening in Greece. And so when they would run, when they would win, they'd get a laurel wreath. Nowadays we get medals and things like that, and then everybody has to sit and listen to your national anthem for however long. But back in the day, you got a wreath, and it was a great honor to win that wreath, and you're sitting there and you have won this prize. And so, but a wreath is literally branches that are, put together, but they are eventually they wither and they die. But so Paul's saying is we run for an imperishable crown because we're running for the prize in the afterlife, the prize that God gives us at the end of our life. We aren't running for material goods here, we're running for the prize at the end. And so, and so he says all these things, and then verse 26, I run thus, not with uncertainty. Worst thing about running cross country that you don't have in track is, where do you go? Because sometimes when I was running cross country, I would get so confused because for your first lap you go the long way, but for your second lap you go the short way, and you take a different trail than the other trail you did because they're trying to get the right mileage in. And so it was really confusing, and sometimes you had to loop again around the thing you just ran, and you're like, why am I doing this again? Or otherwise, I remember there was one race where we were running around this cornfield with a bunch of different paths through it, and I had no idea how far I had run. I knew approximately, I've been running for about 15 minutes, so I should have run around 2 miles at least, but I had no idea where I was. And because of that race was one of my worst races because I didn't know where I was going. I had no idea how far left I had to go, and I couldn't pace myself correctly because of it. And so, and also on top of that, I was slow. So literally I was by myself. There was no one around me. So it was I was just I don't know how much further I have. And so when you run with uncertainty, you don't run so well. And so you have to figure out where your goal is and go there. That's why if you do run competitively cross country and you're really good at it, like I wasn't, I suggest, you go survey the course before you go, because you can run so much better when you know where you're going, when you can identify landmarks, when you know how far away you are from certain things. Our home course, I ran just fine, but the away courses, I struggled so hard. And I love this line, thus I fight not as one who beats the air. Now, I don't know about you guys, I personally love boxing movies. I don't know why. It's so stupid. Usually they win at the end, so I don't know why I like them so much, but I just like boxing movies. I like watching clips of Muhammad Ali fighting. I like watching some of the Rocky movies, the Creed movies. I like those kinds of stories. Don't know why, I just do. But it always confused me, because when you would get in the ring, sometimes you see these guys and they're kind of dancing around, and then they kind of do a kind of thing real quick, right? And it always confused me because I was like, why do they do that? And I've started to realize that it's to show off speed, because when you can punch quickly, usually that's a good thing for you. So they get in there and they're trying to show off how fast they are. But the thing is they're hitting nothing. So it just ends up looking weird to me. And so it's just funny that that's the case. And then you get people who don't hit it or don't go as fast, but they hit really hard. And so George Foreman or Mike Tyson, things like that. And it's these people might be fast, but they're just hitting air. So at the end of the day, if they aren't hitting anything important, what does it really matter? And so when we're going through the Christian life, we shouldn't just be hitting at air. We should be fighting in such a way that we win. You know what I mean? Um, and this kind of goes back to what I was talking about before. We can't just sprint through all of this. I mean, think about like Iron Mike Tyson. He was a really good boxer, but he had a lung problem. So if you survived 3 rounds against him, because the guy had a crazy punch, if you could survive 3 rounds against him, you would win the fight because you could outlast him. He couldn't breathe past 3. Like, he just struggled so hard. And he just didn't have that endurance. So when we're fighting, it's not always about just throwing ourselves at something. It's about being smart. It's about being strategic. And anybody who runs can tell you that too. People who swim can tell you that. You know, you can't sprint your way through the mile. You have to pace yourself. And so when it comes to the Christian life, we have to be wise with the way that we're running, because it's really easy to get burnt out. But when you burn out, you don't necessarily use your resources effectively. You're not using your time effectively, and you might end up actually hurting people because you're trying to rush them. When we're trying to go through our life slowly, we're trying to be quickly but patiently. We're trying to make sure that we are being consistent. We're trying to run in a way that we can obtain the prize. And I know that sounds really vague, and it does look different for everybody. I personally have had to learn in my life to really slow down and really focus on things and making sure that I'm doing the best I can quality-wise and not just doing quantity, because my natural personality is to run around and just do everything. But I can't do that. So I can't do that for very long. So I have to make sure that I'm doing things of quality, And when I'm serving, when I'm reading, when I'm praying, you don't know how hard it is for me sometimes, because like, you ever met those people that like they're like, oh, I prayed for 5 hours this morning, and it's like, good for you, but I can't do that, because when I start praying and I get a couple of minutes into praying and I'm hearing that noise and this and I have all this stuff that I have to do today and it's going through my head, and my brain just doesn't do good at kicking those things out. And so I can't necessarily pray for 5 hours like that, because that's just not who I am. But that doesn't mean I shouldn't pray. It means that I should be wise in the way that I pray. If I can't pray for long periods of times at once, then I need to do it multiple times. If I can't focus on God long enough while reading His Word, if I can't read a chapter at a time because I lose my attention or my focus, then I need to read smaller portions and make sure that I'm understanding them and digesting them. Does that make sense? So everybody is different. Everybody has to run in a way that works for them. Everybody has to fight in a way that works for them. Because the way that people fight is different too. It's like, one thing that's a really big problem in the church right now, and just everywhere in general, is pornography. And every person who has had that issue or has that issue has to fight in a different way. No two people are the same, because some people use it as a suppressant because they don't want to face their issues. Some people use it as something that elevates. It makes them feel better on top of all successes they've had. And so it's one of those things where it's like, you have to be aware of what are your triggers, why does this happen in such a way. And so you can't fight it the same way for every person. Every person is different, and you can't just say, do this, do this, do this, and you'll be fine. It's a long process. It's a gradual process of learning to fight sin, and to learning to fight the devil and his temptation, and your own personal sin nature. And how do you beat those? Because it says in verse 27, I discipline my body and bring it into subjection. Our own sin nature sometimes is kind of like, we literally have to sit there and punch it into the ground, because our sin nature rises up and tells us, hey, you should go do this. Hey, you should go look at pornography. Hey, you don't have to tell anybody about that. You can just lie about it. Who needs to know? You know what I mean? Hey, just keep it to yourself. You don't have to stand up for anything. Let them do whatever they want. And that's not what we should be doing. We should be fighting against those urges. We should not be looking at pornography. We should not just allow people to do whatever they want. And I'm not saying that we should stop people, but we shouldn't allow sin to go on without calling it sin. Because if people are never told, how do they know? And and we have to we have to be truthful and honest, but that is something that has to be worked on. And honestly, I still work on that. And sometimes I have a difficult relationship with the truth, and I wish it wasn't the case, because when I'm preaching here, as he said, lest when I have preached to others, I myself should become disqualified. If I am partaking in these sins alongside everybody, I can ruin my preaching. People might look at what I'm saying and go, well, you're still doing X, Y, and Z when you said not to do that. How do you expect us to do something you yourself can't do? And so it's especially important for teachers. And Paul, who is saying here, we have to make sure that we aren't disqualifying ourselves. And that goes back to the beginning. We have to compete according to the rules of the event, because if you don't compete according to the rules of the event, you get disqualified. And so when I'm preaching and I'm going through my life, I have to make sure that I'm being aware to make sure I'm not disqualifying myself. And it's the same thing with everybody's life. When you're going through your life, you need to make sure that you're not disqualifying yourself, that you're not discrediting yourself. Are you presenting Christ in an effective way, or are you being disqualified because you are misrepresenting him? Are people getting the right idea when they look at you and your life? Are they getting the right idea about Christ when they look at your life? And that's a really heavy question to ask, because some people have their own issues with Jesus, and sometimes they'll use you as a scapegoat. But that doesn't change the fact we should be representing Christ the best we can. And so now I want to jump over to 1 Corinthians 12. Hebrews 12, if we can do it really quickly. And in verse 12, he says, therefore, we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who, for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. I love how it says, since we are so surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. I'm not going to read it today, but this passage follows Hebrews 11, which is what we call the Hall of Faith. And it's going through all these people that have had faith in God and done great things in the name of God because of their faith. And so it says, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, in my mind it draws to mind like a relay race where, the baton's getting passed on. So now, the first runner ran a great race. The second runner ran a great race. The third runner ran a great race. And now you, the anchor, are being handed the baton. What are you going to do with it? And so, since we are so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and sin which so easily ensnares us. If you're running with weights, it's not very effective. If you have ever been in an airport and you're late for your flight, it's not very effective to try to run with weights. But in weight isn't necessarily a sin, because they separate that. Weight and sin, which so easily ensnares us. Weights are things that we are holding on to. What are things that we are holding on to that are prohibiting us from running the race? Are we holding on to unforgiveness? Are we bitter against our fellow man? Are we gossiping about things? Are we lying? Are we, holding all these things in, and these stuff that we just don't want to let go? We don't want to give it to God. We just want to hold it, and we just want to carry it, but we shouldn't. It's a weight that we should not be holding on to. And sin, which easily ensnares us. We talked a little bit about that earlier, so I'm not going to redo that, but you can't run if your feet are hindered, And so we are to run the race with endurance, what I talked about before. It's not a sprint. The life of a Christian is not a sprint, and that's what the race ultimately is. It's our life. It's the one that God has put before us. And it says, look unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despised the shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Jesus went through, everything that we have gone through. It tells us earlier in Hebrews 4 that he is tempted in every way that we were. And so we can't be like, Jesus wouldn't understand because he never went through this. No, he did. Jesus ran the race before us, in other words. He started it and he finished it and endured the cross because of it. And that Jesus' life was hard. That's definitely for sure. He was rejected by everyone. Even his own closest friends betrayed him. And he was crucified. Not any of us can say that we've ever been crucified. But we are to look unto Jesus. And it's like I said before, if you don't know where you're running, you're not going to run it very well. Where are we running? We're looking unto Jesus. We're running to the finish line, and Jesus is at the finish line. That's where we're running. And we're to run in a way that would please him. We're to run in a way that gives us that imperishable crown at the end of our life. And so, you're asking me, like, how do I know that it's kind of like talking about the Christian life? Well, in 2 Timothy chapter 4, it's the end of Paul's life. We've looked at the beginning of this chapter before at actual Fusion when we were in person. But picking up in verse 6, it says, "For I am already being poured out as a drink offering, for the time of my departure is at hand. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Finally, there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me on that day. And not to me only, but also to all who love his appearing." We know that it's about life. It's about our Christian life. It's how we're living our life, because that's what Paul did. In my opinion, Paul was an athlete. And I mean, he traveled a lot, so I guarantee you he ran a lot while he was doing it. But Paul uses this idea, these images of fights and these images of races throughout the Bible, but we know it's talking about the Christian life. We know it's talking about enduring life. And I love how he says, "I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, and I have kept the faith." I really hope that I am able to say that when I die, that I fought the good fight, and I finished the race, and I kept the faith. The thing that's really interesting about fighting, the thing that's really interesting about racing, right, especially in the Christian life, and I think this is true, it's not about how many times you stumble, it's not about how many times you get knocked down, it's about how many times you get up. And Proverbs tells us, "The righteous man may fall 7 times and rise again." And so in the same way, we will be going through our life, and things are going to hit us. We're going to lose some fights, we're going to get knocked down, we're going to trip over some stuff, we're going to carry weights that we shouldn't be carrying, we're going to hit the ground really hard sometimes. But you got to get up, pick the dirt out of your knees, and keep going, and keep running, and keep going for that finish line. And I don't know how long your race is going to be. I don't know how long my race is going to be. But I pray to God that you run a solid race, that you run a race that is pleasing to God, that you get to the end of your life and he says, "Well done, good and faithful servant." I look forward to the day that I finish my race. I know I'm still young, and that's not me with the death wish, but just knowing that I've run my race and I've done the best I can, and I will stand before God and I will partake in a reward based off of my performance, and to get that imperishable crown, and to know that I'm going to have that for the rest of eternity. It makes this lifespan of 60, 90 years, whatever it might be, makes this lifespan seem so short in comparison to eternity. When you think of eternity in relation to everything else, and I saw Francis Chan do this one time, and he actually had props. I don't, so I'm going to do this with this pen. Imagine this whole thing is eternity, that we could put eternity on a graph, right? This black point up here, but not even the gold point, is your lifespan on this earth, and eternity is all this. Look at that in comparison. Anything that we go through in this life, it might be hard in the moment, it might be difficult, we might want to give up, we might want to stop racing, but ultimately it'll be worth it. I guarantee you that, because that's what Scripture teaches. And so I encourage you, run your race the best that you can. Run the race that you need to run. Do the things that you need to do. Drop those weights that you're carrying. Watch out for the pitfalls of sin. And keep running towards Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. I want to thank you for watching my video. It's really great to have you, and really hope this was helpful for you. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. There's a messaging system or comments and all that stuff down below. If you have my information, feel free to reach out to me. I'm not putting it out here on the internet because I'm not dumb. Well, I'm not dumb about this. So thank you for watching, and I will see you guys next week with another video.